This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. So much of your personal info is out of your control, like your insurance provider that has your social security number and your favorite retailer that has your payment details. If they get breached, your information, your identity, is vulnerable. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
All right, hi everybody. I'm Larry Kudlow. This is Protecting Your Future, sponsored by Colonial Metals Group. We just had the boss here, Mr. Paul Stone. And we're going to talk about protecting your future by keeping an eye on money and politics. We've got special guests today, Liz Peek, Fox News contributor, syndicated columnist, and Steve Forbes, chairman and editor-in-chief of Forbes Media. And Steve's most recent book, Inflation, What It Is, Why It's Bad, How to Fix It. Welcome back, kids. Very exciting. One of the best Saturdays of all time, following one of the best Tuesdays of all time. Not that I'm biased, of course, but let's talk. Steve Forbes, go to you first, all right? If you win, you win the White House, you win the Senate, they're going to win the House. It's a three-house sweep. He wins a popular vote, and he wins the Electoral College. Now, here's where I'm going. This is an old-fashioned, but we haven't seen it in recent years, mandate for change. If you go back to, you and I, back to the Reagan years, 1980, mandate for change, and change it was, I would argue that President Trump has the only real mandate for change we've seen in a very long time. Wanted to get your take on it, and Liz too. But Steve, jump in on this one. Mandate for change, what kind of change?
Your allusion to 1980 is exactly right, when there was a fundamental shift in economic policy that led to a long-range boom. We're still living off some of the fruits of it today, despite all the assaults against it. And the key thing is, fortunately, Trump knows the importance of deregulation. He knows the importance of tax cuts. They know they have to do it next year. They're going to expand them. That's going to be good. And and on the spending side, I think you're going to see, with a new budget director, real progress there. The thing, though, I think, Larry, we should be looking for is, I think, for the first time since the early 1950s, we're going to have a real collision, not that anyone wants it, a real collision between the administration, the Treasury Department, and the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve's models are wrong. They've been very destructive. And I think the Fed sort of knows that an examination is coming, which is why he had that attitude of Chairman Powell saying, no, I'm not going to leave. He can't fire me. Well, the president can push you out if he wants to. But the key thing is not personnel. And contrary to what the press is going to tell us, it's not about the sacred independence of the Fed. It's about their model, the whole thing on the Phillips curve, about their regulation, capital requirements, and the like. I think there's going to be a fundamental reexamination. You may remember, Larry, back in the 1980s, when the economy really took off in 83 and 84, growing 6-8%, and there was talk at the Fed at the time, oh, this is not sustainable. We must slow it down. It's inflationary. I think that period may be coming, and that's when you're going to see the clash. It's not about independence. It's about models and competence.
Yeah, when he started talking about models, Fed models and algorithms, Liz, I felt, oh, yeah, sure. How about I will take ChatGPT over the Fed algorithms. All right? Just dial it up. Dial it up.
At least there's some intelligence there, right? It may be artificial, but couple that with intelligence. I think Steve raises a really, really interesting point. I think it was Henry Paulson, former Treasury Secretary said the Fed's been wrong for 50 years. And I think I think you could back that up. They've pretty much always been wrong, which is why some people think we should have a monetary guidance in place according to kind of expected growth levels or whatever. I'll leave that up to you guys. But I think the mandate here is to reverse an awful lot of things that people feel have been going wrong, Larry, even people in the middle, even some Democrats. There's one guy that came on Twitter and said, hey, I really don't like Trump, but let's face it, Democrats have really been guiding this country in the wrong direction. And he listed about 10 or 15 things that are all apparent in New York City. He's a New York City resident. But, having to do with crime, having to do with illegal immigration, all these things. And also things like biological men playing in women's sports. There's just so many. There's a lot, I would say, of low-hanging fruit. But I have to say, I am not out for vengeance, but I am out for accountability. And I think Trump is going to be well within his rights to go through things like the FBI, the CIA, and try and root out the people in those agencies who are partisan, who have been opposing his presidency and his candidacy from day one and trying to undermine his time in office. So, I think he has a huge amount on his plate. But I just hope he moves in some of the things that people are really fed up with, because that'll serve him very, very well. And he needs if he loses Congress in 2 years, he's got a very short window to operate. I'm hoping he doesn't, but I'm saying he's got to deliver on some of this stuff pretty darn quickly. And I don't think that the public is going to be up in arms over Federal Reserve policy. I think it's going to be much more obvious things that he can tackle.
Well, I think we were talking earlier in the show about one of my favorite post-election stories in the Washington Times. FBI brass stunned and shell-shocked over Trump re-election. Yeah, really, I love that. It's countdown for Ray because people here don't think he'll stay to get fired. Yeah, well, they deserve it after what they did, played along with the Justice Department's weaponization and lawfare. That's all got to come to an end. By the way, Trump, I think Trump talks a lot, Steve Forbes, about unity and healing the country at his victory speech Tuesday night. Success will bring us together. I mean, a lot of important phrases. I don't think that victory speech he gave, I know it was in the wee hours of the morning, but I don't think it got enough coverage, and I think it's very important. Success will bring us together, healing the country, unifying the country. Promises made, promises kept. To Liz's point, I think he's determined. He'll have the legislative mandate to fulfill the mandate for change. I mean, it's just kind of, what people want. Here, think of it this way. The last week or two of the campaign, Steve, here's Kamala Harris calling him a fascist and Hitler and all the rest of it and garbage, and Joe Biden chiming in. And Trump's out there talking about tax cuts and deregulation and drill, baby, drill. Think about it. There's a little she's tried to make it about him and, make him evil him. And he's out there telling the rest of the country how he's going to make things better for them. Yeah. I mean, what a contrast. I mean, the Democrats are so stupid. And by the way, one other point, Steve, this is the broadest base. I was arguing till I was blue in the face last Monday and Tuesday, frankly, that he wasn't just talking to the base. He was expanding the base. That was the key to the working coalition. All shapes and sizes, all colors, right? Black, brown, young, including women, by the way. He closed the gender gap. This is the broadest, biggest tent, Steve Forbes, the Republicans have had in I don't know how long.
Well, the thing about Kamala Harris is the reason she had to attack him personally because their policies were unpopular. And I think the late, great Billy Beane of baseball said, what do you do about bad morale in the locker room? He said, start winning games. And I think your point that when you start to have a successful economy, we saw it in the early 1980s. Those of us still remember when woolly mammoths were around. In the early 1980s, the turnaround of Reagan, Morning Again in America, the mood changed dramatically. And I think that's the key thing here when he talks about unity It's not giving in to the other side. It's creating an environment with positive policies that people say, yeah, things I can look ahead again. I can be happy again. I can look in the future with confidence again. And that's the key. And the whole thing on if he just bans men playing in women's sports, as Liz alluded to, people know the whole lack of common sense is what I think really depressed people. And that is going to change. And the faster he moves, the better. And the key thing, too, on regulation is like passing certain acts to make sure these regulations, deregulation, are encased in law, so you don't have the situation where if you get a new president, he or she can undo what you did before, which is what Biden did. So they got to get as much legislation passed, putting this in the force of law, so that people can plan with a sense of permanence rather than a yo-yo.
You know, Liz, by the way, that's an important point. I think that's right. Executive orders are useful but not conclusive, and you would be better off legislating wherever possible. You're right. But the other point, Liz, I think was a massive rejection of Bidenomics, a massive rejection of woke cultural and social policy. You know, I mean, in other words, you take this working class coalition that Ms. Trump put together, take that coalition. Their take-home pay fell during the Biden years, and they hated that. And prices went up, and they hated that. But they also hated a lot of what they heard about transgenderism. You mentioned the fact that biological males playing in women's sports. Anti-religion. You see the numbers on Catholics, religion, Christians, unbelievable. I mean, she won people who don't like religion by 40 points. Trump won everybody that ever went to church or temple. I mean, really, the religion thing was just huge. People just not dictating which religion, but you can't have a country without religion. And the woke cultural mandates just never play. I mean, it was extremism to a fault.
Yeah, and her not attending the Al Smith dinner was kind of an example of that, right? I mean, she kind of rubbed everybody's nose in the face that she wasn't going to kind of play by the rules. She wasn't going to kowtow to any kind of religious group. What a stupid decision among many other stupid decisions. But I think you guys are totally right. We have two tracks. We have the economic track. I put out a piece, I guess yesterday, talking about the stock market rally. A stock market rally, I don't know if everyone's aware of this, the day after rally was the biggest in our history, including 2016, when Trump did, also produce a pretty big surge in stock values. But this was extraordinary. The VIX, the fear gauge, completely collapsed. And this is after, let's remember, 23 Nobel economists said, oh, my gosh, Kamala Harris's program is so much better than Donald Trump's. And yesterday, I can't believe this headline in the FT, surging U.S. stock market sound alarm for overheating economy. They can't stop. I mean, it's kind of like, whoa, more bad news. Investors are making money betting on lower taxes and deregulation and all that stuff, Larry. We've talked about it so much. I actually did some work on how much Biden has regulated. It is over the top. And interestingly, this really hasn't been talked about or reported very much, but their regulatory excesses of the last 3 years are more than all prior presidents going back 40 years. That's quite an accomplishment. And by the way, an awful lot of that stuff has to come undone. And it will be, I think.
I think going back to Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true, by the way.
By the way,
I'm sure that's true.
The stock market went up because the Nobel economists were against it.
Yes.
We have to reassert causality here. Just kidding. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break. We're talking money and politics. Liz Peek, Fox News contributor, the great Steve Forbes, chairman, editor-in-chief of Forbes Media. Steve's latest book, Inflation, What It Is, Why It's Bad, How to Fix It. I'm Kudlow. Be right back.
Larry Kudlow. From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
We're talking money and politics. Steve Forbes, chairman, editor-in-chief of Forbes Media. And Steve's latest book is Inflation, What It Is, Why It's Bad, and How to Fix It. And Liz Peek, Fox News contributor, syndicated columnist. You know, Liz, I just meant to weigh in. We ran out of time in the first segment. You're quite right that actually you're right on both counts. Kamala didn't go to the Al Smith dinner. She also forgot to go to the Adam Smith dinner. She missed on both counts.
There you go.
And she could have used a little free market religion. Ha, ha, ha. Just thought I'd merge that together. But it is, I'm sorry, this is pretty sick. But it is interesting. Ari Fleischer, great pal, Fox News contributor, was on the show the other night. Those who never go to religious services were plus 26 points for Harris. And those who say they have no religion were plus 40 for Harris. I mean, it's really quite something. Now, I just kind of merged that in with the cultural mandates of wokeism, and they don't like religion, and that was the whole problem with the Al Smith dinner, the message it sent. Joe Biden would have I think Joe Biden, by the way, much less bad on that point than Kamala turned out to be. You know, I mean, the guy is a practicing Catholic of sorts. Anyway, I want to go back, Steve Moore, the battle between the Treasury and the Fed. Your monetary insights are very important. How bad you think that's going to be? I mean, the Treasury, let's assume the Trump Treasury, that's if it's whoever it is, Paul Besson, whoever, the Trump Treasury is going to be totally pro-growth. They're cutting taxes and deregulating and so forth. Drill, baby, drill. The Federal Reserve will probably rebel against that, growing too much, growing too fast. Those are those crazy Fed algorithms. And the whole building is biased against Trump to begin with, Steve Forbes. So how does that get resolved?
Well, I think what you do is you start making the case now, the intellectual case now, of how the Federal Reserve is off track. So when you start making proposals in coming months, people will have a frame of reference. This is not just about raising or cutting interest rates. This is about how the whole Fed operates. And so you start setting that by having seminars, debates, testimony in Congress and the like, and then saying that, then pointing out, as Liz and you and others have pointed out, the Fed's miserable record. The Fed should have one task or two, and that is stable value of the dollar and dealing with occasional panics, you know, lender of last resort, which the Brits invented back in the 1860s, and that's it. And on the regulatory side, Treasury, the first thing Treasury should do is get away from, repudiate all these Basel Accords or on Basel III, which require banks to have higher capital. They're going to impose 19% increase on capital on banks. They compromised on 9%. The new Treasury Secretary should say it's 0%. We're out of that crazy regime. You can't have bureaucrats put levels of risk on all sorts of loans where banks are inhibited from making loans, which is why you have the rise of all these new institutions making loans themselves to replace the banks. Where do these institutions often get the money to lend, since banks can't? From banks. So it's a crazy situation, and they should attack that and make the case relentlessly. So when the fight comes, people have a positive frame of reference. The prosperity caused inflation? Not. And start the debate now, so it's not out of the blue when the fight comes.
You know, also, Liz, to Steve's point on the regulatory front, Basel Accords and capital banks. My impression is most of the banks are overcapitalized to begin with. They don't need more capital. But quit telling the banks where to lend. How about that? Quit telling. In other words, quit saying you can't loan to fossil fuels. That is going to be front and center, and it was several years ago. But also, banks should make loans where they want to make loans. I don't think the regulators should tell banks where to make loans, just like I don't think the SEC should think it's the Weather Channel instead of the Security Exchange Commission, right? I mean,
and yes, of course. And where money flows, you're going to see bigger investment, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But you're totally right. They should get out of the business of dictating that. To Steve's point, they did back off some of the worst kind of concepts about how rigorously banks have to channel their investments into away from fossil fuels and things like that, and away from the most egregious capital requirements. But look, obviously bank stocks have done well because they think there will be less regulation. The dumbest thing is what Steve just talked about. They have pushed more and more lending into organizations that really are not at all regulated or very lightly regulated, and they're getting their money from the bank.
Right.
So tell me how that resolves the problem. It doesn't. Look, you're going to have some pretty smart people go through some of this stuff to figure out what is working and what is not. Again, that's going to take a lot of time, and they have really got to hit the ground running to get some of this stuff done, because it's become pretty embedded in our regulatory framework. And also the SEC is a major area where it's not just the Fed, it's also the SEC that has to be kind of blown up. There are a lot of people who have to be gone on day one, right, Larry? Gary Gensler, Lena Khan, all these people who've been sort of
bye-bye.
I can't wait.
I would just say go to Al Smith and go to Adam Smith. Just summarize it that way.
Oh.
Thank you, Steve Forbes. Thank you, Liz Peek. You're both wonderful folks. I'm Kudlow. Great fun today. We'll be back next weekend. Thanks for listening.
Lowe's knows you want to get even more value for the holiday. That's why as a MyLowe's Rewards member, you get new member deals on holiday decor, tools, and more. And you earn points when you shop. More points equal more rewards to help you save on holiday and more. Not a member? Join for free today at Lowe's.com/MyLowe's Rewards, because Lowe's knows deals. Program subject to terms and conditions. Points are awarded on eligible purchases. See Lowe's.com/terms for full details. Subject to change.